Okay, so we've got two box of Cioks. This is a box of Cioks I got for the missus. Let's get rid of that. And we're focusing on this one today. This is the Cioks DC-7 power supply that you can mount onto your pedal board. And it saves you having to use separate power supplies or separate plugs and adapters for all of your gear. So let's take a look what's inside the box. First of all, we have a Cioks Flex and DC link cable selection guide. So this is going to give you all of the information about different flex cables. Let's pop that to the side. Cioks sticker. We've got a user's manual. In here, you'll find a power cable wherever you are in the world. I'm in the UK, so we've got the 3-pin adapter and it goes to an IEC. We've got a mixture of DC connections, all sorts of things, so we can power up a range of gear. We've got an Allen key and a couple of spare screws. And the main thing that we're all interested in is the DC-7, which is right here. So let me tell you what I intend to use it for. Well, I want to try and power everything on my pedal board. Now, I've not got a particularly large pedal board, but I do have some power-hungry pedals. So I'll be looking at powering the Boss RC600, the Line 6 HX Stomp, a Polytune Mini 3 tuner, the Boss FS7 foot switch, the MIDI Captain Mini 6, and perhaps the Mackie Pro FX 6 V3 mixer, although we'll take a look at everything in detail later on. So the three things to consider when you want to use a power supply on your pedal board are the volts. So each of your pedals will require a certain amount of volts. This could be 9 volt, 12, 15, or 18 volt, depending on each of your pedals. Now you need to make sure that you send the correct amount of voltage to your pedals. So sending 18 volts to a 9 volt pedal or vice versa means that your pedal might not function correctly and you do risk causing significant damage. Basically, if your pedal says 9 volts, then send 9 volts. The second thing to consider are the amps. So this is the minimum amount of current that the pedal needs to function correctly, also known as the current draw. This is measured in amps and milliamps, and it's essential that you ensure sufficient power is being sent across to each of your pedals. For example, if you have a pedal that requires 100 milliamps, then an output of 80 milliamps would be insufficient. And this is likely to mean that your pedal will not function correctly. Alternatively, if you have a power supply like the Cioks DC-7 that can send 660 milliamps at 9 volts from each of its 7 outputs, then this is absolutely fine to use to send 100 milliamps to your pedal, because ultimately the pedal only takes what it needs. So you won't overload the pedal this way. You'll just be feeding the pedal the 100 milliamps it wants and have 560 milliamps remaining on that particular output. And of course, if you wanted to then daisy chain off to other pedals from the same connection, that's absolutely possible as well. The third and final thing to consider would be the polarity. So this is the connection at the input of the pedal. So if the pedal says that it requires a center negative connection, then a center positive plug will not work and it will likely damage your equipment. Simply put, each DC pedal requires 2 power rails, which are positive and negative, similar to the terminals on a battery. Now, these rails need to align correctly from the DC plug to the connection on your pedal. With a center negative connection, this means that the middle pin on your DC plug is negative and the outside is positive, then vice versa on the center positive connection. Added to this, you'll also find that there are different barrel sizes, which could be 2.1 millimeter, 2.5 millimeter, and then there's a different type of connection altogether, which is the less common 3.5 millimeter jack. Before connecting anything to your pedals, please make sure that you're using the correct size barrel and that you're using the correct polarity for that pedal. You'll be able to find out the requirements for each of your pedals either on the pedal itself, the adapter supplied with the pedal, or in the manual. And you must take these 3 things into account when looking at powering your pedal board using a power supply such as the Cioks DC-7. Now let's take a closer look at it. On the left-hand side, we have the input from the AC mains. We have 7 isolated outputs. We've got 3 on the left and 4 on the right. And as mentioned, these can send up to 660 milliamps at 9 volts. If you actually take a look at the outputs, you can see that they are RCA outs, and these give us a better mechanical and electrical connection, as well as making it easy for us to identify which end goes into the power supply and which end goes into your pedal. On the right-hand side over here, you can also see next to the 4 RCA outputs, we have a USB out so we can power other devices. And we've also got a 24 volt output so we can extend power from the DC-7 to other power supplies such as the DC-4, the DC-8, etc. So this gives us the opportunity to extend the DC-7 and have more outputs, perhaps using the DC-4 or the DC-8, and it allows us to increase the size of our pedal board without having to get a separate DC-7. Next to each of the 7 outputs, we obviously have an LED indicator to say whether that input is in use. And we've also got an option to change the voltage for all 7 outputs. And if you take a look on the front of the DC-7, you can see the 4 ways of changing between the voltage. We've got the 9-volt settings, which you can see all 7 outputs are currently selected to, and then you can amend that as you wish. Just remember that the current draw will be reduced the more volts you add. So at 18 volts, for example, each output can only send up to 330 milliamps, as opposed to 660 milliamps at 9 volts. As mentioned, the pedals that I actually plan to power using the DC-7 are the RC600, which requires 9 volts at 1.1 amps or 1.2 amps when using phantom power, and that has a center negative connection. The HX Stomp, which is also 9 volts, and that current draw is up to 900 milliamps. However, it does say on the rear of the unit that it requires 3 amps, but after some significant testing by other users of the HX Stomp, it never draws a current of more than 900 milliamps. And that's with all of the lights on, which is actually increasing the current draw. So it doesn't really go above 900 milliamps, so we'll factor that in. The Polytune 3 Mini is 9 volts. It's only a tuner, so it takes anywhere between 40 and 100 milliamps, and that's also a center negative connection. The FS7, 9 volts and up to 25 milliamps, which is also center negative. So you can see the Polytune 3 Mini and the FS7 are both going to be really low on that current draw. I will be using an external MIDI controller called the MIDI Captain Mini 6. Now that's currently on its way. I don't have it just yet. It's a brand new MIDI controller, so stay tuned for some content on that. But looking at the spec online, it can take any voltage between 9 and 12 volts. It's also polarity free, so a center negative or center positive connection can be input into that device. And it takes anywhere between 100 and 400 milliamps, and that's with full brightness. Finally, I have my Mackie Pro FX 6 V3 mixer, and that's 12 volts. And because it's a mixer, it's a very power hungry device, so it actually takes up to 2 amps, again with a center negative DC connection. So if I do plan to power everything else, my Cioks DC-7 will not have sufficient power left in order to power the mixer. But I do have a little workaround that I'll talk about later in the video. Now, in order to provide sufficient power to the RC600 and HX Stomp, we're going to have to use something called the parallel flex adapter. And what this does, it combines 2 outputs of the DC-7 into one. Now, I actually have 2 of those flex adapters here. You can also buy these from Cioks, and it's important that you get the right ones. So these are the parallel flex adapters. So let's take a look at one. So you can see we've got 2 RCA male connections which go into the DC-7 to 1 RCA female. And then I'll run out of this either into my RC600 or my HX Stomp. So for example, if we want to use outlet 4 and 5 for my RC600, then I will plug each of these into 4 and 5. And we've already talked about how much power at 9 volts each of these can send. So we can send 660 milliamps at 9 volts out of each of these connections. And this gives us a total of 1320 milliamps that I could now use to run from here into my RC600. So as I mentioned earlier, my RC600 requires 1.1 amps or 1.2 amps if I'm using phantom power. And now we know that this can provide 1.32 amps, which is 1320 milliamps. So again, that will provide sufficient power for my RC600 to function correctly. Now let's talk about the HX Stomp. So again, I've got another one of these parallel flex adapters. Let's take it out of its pack. We've got the 2 RCA males to the RCA female. Let's plug that into 6 and 7. And now I can run this again with 1.32 amps or 1320 milliamps to power my HX Stomp, which we've mentioned only requires 900 milliamps. So I do have around about 420 milliamps left over from this connection in case I did want to daisy chain off to other pedals. So Cioks have got the Type 3 yellow flex adapter. If we take this out of the pack, you can see we have the yellow male RCA connection, and that runs to the right size barrel and also the correct polarity for the HX Stomp. So we would just run this out of this connection here and then run this end into our HX Stomp and we're good to go. So to sum up, would I recommend getting hold of a Cioks DC-7? Absolutely. Why? Well, for many reasons. Let's take a final look at it. It's low profile. It's about 1 inch deep. It's extremely powerful, providing up to 660 milliamps from each of its outputs at 9 volts. It's robust, it's reliable, it's durable. It's got 7 isolated outputs to help prevent noise. It's got the flexibility to switch voltage from 9 to 18 volts. It's got a USB out to power other devices such as a USB MIDI hub, an iPad or a phone, etc. It's extendable, so I can use it with other power supplies if the pedal board does grow. And ultimately, it's a quality piece of kit. And as soon as I finish making this video, it's going straight onto my pedal board. So that's it for today, everybody. I hope you found the video useful. If you have, you can do me a favor and hit that like button to help the channel reach more people like yourself. You can subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. You can support the channel with the various links below. I'll also leave links down below to purchase the DC-7 and the relevant flex cables. And as always, everybody, I will see you in the next one.